My name is Shawn Lucas. I'm the manager of spiritual care services at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I come here by way of personal experience with mental health and addictions. But let me tell you a little bit about what I think spirituality is and why I think it's helpful for people in their recovery. Spirituality for me is about learning about oneself in particular. It's a journey to find hope, purpose, and meaning in one's life. And the way we do that oftentimes is we help people to grieve things. We help people to accept things. We help people to let go of things. We help people to claim a sense of their own personal identity with who they are. We help people to resist things wherever they may need to do that. Mostly, we help people to understand what it is that they believe about themselves and about the world. And occasionally, we might challenge people when we see that there are conflicts occurring in their lives. We use psychotherapeutic tools in order to do that. Most spiritual care practitioners are now registered with the College of Psychotherapy. And we do that with clients at our hospitals. So if I can use an analogy of what I think is somewhat different from a religious approach would be that we have our, whatever our belief system is sort of back here, but it doesn't interfere or hamper the conversation that we're having. So my beliefs aren't as important to your beliefs in the discussion that we might have if we're meeting in my office or on the unit or someplace else.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And my name is Imam Abdullah Patel. I am a faith leader in the Muslim community, serving this as Imam for volunteer Imams for the last 47 years here in Canada. And I have many hats on my head, none at the moment, including a police hat. So if you see me in police uniform as a chaplain with York Regional Police, you can come and say hello, you won't get a ticket. Nor can I forgive one ticket either. I'm also a chaplain at the University of Toronto for the last over 20 years as well, a volunteer chaplain. And since culture was mentioned as one of these things, that I can always say that I was born in India, so I have a background in Indian culture in Western India. I grew up till about 12, and then I lived part of my life in the Caribbean, in the beautiful island of Barbados, where my family had moved. And I'm here, as I said, since '69. I have also served as a human rights commissioner for the province of Ontario for 6 years, among other hats that I have. I'm a founder and currently director of interfaith relations for Canadian Council of Imams. And in terms of spiritual care, I'm currently vice president, was past president as well for the Ontario Multifaith Council, now known as the Canadian Multifaith Federation, which has been mandated by the government for over 20 years to provide spiritual and religious care in government institutions, all the correctional facilities, hospitals, and long-term care facilities. I've served as a visiting chaplain at Whitby Mental Hospital and CAMH as well. And also a mental health counselor, and for the last 5-6 years, well, people ask me if I sleep. Yes. My emails you find going out at 1 o'clock in the morning at times. People ask me, that's the time I get to read. And also I sit on the Interfaith Correction Committee, Correction Canada, so look policy for federal jails on accommodation. So there are a number of hats I have, and most recently this year I have also sitting at the table at the City Hall on senior strategy planning. So mental health in Muslim community is also a growing problem, which I'll talk about later. So I don't want to make this a speech as my introduction, but looking forward for a good conversation.
Hi there, I'm Leif Gregerson. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm Leif Gregerson. I'm the author of about 10 books, 4 poetry collections, 2 short story collections. The most important books I've written, I feel, are 2 memoirs I've written about my life with bipolar disorder, one being a story before I was diagnosed, my teen years, and then the other being the story after I was diagnosed. It's been a difficult, long struggle to recover, but I do feel I'm in recovery. I wouldn't rather be anyone but myself. I actually live in Alberta. Bill invited me out to appear at this conference, and I'm very happy. Toronto's a beautiful city. And let's see, what else is there? I just do a lot of writing, working on a short story collection, different things like that. Oh, and I also volunteer for the Schizophrenia Society of Alberta, giving talks to schools, police classes, university classes, about mental health awareness and about my own experiences to help people to understand, like to fight stigma and to help people understand more about what they themselves may be going through, what family members may be going through, and very happy to be here.
I don't know how I'm going to follow all that up. So my name is Colin Hubley. I'm in a 12-step fellowship that's all about like spirituality and helping others. So that's basically what my life is like now. I guess my credentials would be my experience, which has depth and weight. I'm a heroin user, methadone, Oxycontin, Percocet. It doesn't matter, right? Just put it into my body, right? So that's basically it. I have a job now. I work for a company. They're great. I do building controls. It's weird. Anyways, so it's great. So I can't wait for this to get going because the 2 groups before this was pretty awesome. So, anyways, let's go.
Okay, we're going. Here we go. Okay, so let's put the 2 together. Let's talk about recovery and spirituality, and talk about how your spirituality affects your recovery. What does it do? Is it a crutch for you? Is it actual real help? Is it psychological? Let's get your thoughts on that. Recovery and spirituality. How does it help? And now a couple of the last panels you talked about the addiction panels. Some people said, well, definitely God was there. Another person said, well, I just made that decision. Maybe it was God or whatever. So let's talk about that, spirituality and recovery.
So I would just say that in my own journey, I've been sober for almost 20 years, and that's where my spiritual journey began. For me, spirituality does not necessarily include a belief in a higher power or a God or something like that. Spirituality incorporates all of our worldviews, however we see or experience the world. For me, I notice that I experience that most when I'm by myself and when I'm in community. So I seek out community when I'm feeling like I need support of some sort. And for me, that community can be a 12-step fellowship, or it can be a religious community, or it can be going to a concert. Any of those things can feed my soul. And I have to necessarily reach out to those things in order to recharge and to grow. And that's something that I have to do at least weekly. I notice within myself that when I don't do that, I get kind of grumpy, irritable, and I start making judgments about people, and I'm stop being a kind of happy person that I am. So that's what spirituality means for me. It's about kind of touching in with myself to understand what the heck is going on with me, but also seeking community where I can kind of go, okay, I'm not the only person who's experiencing this. This is normal, and I need that sort of constant reminder. I also, touching into community for me is like reaching out to other people and seeing. For me, I call it the divinity, to see the divinity in all people and in all things, and recognizing that I'm somehow a part of that makes me feel good and sort of enriches my experience.
Oh, sure. Hi. Spirituality for me, it began in my illness. Of course, when I was a kid, we'd watch Jesus Christ Superstar at Christmas time, and that was the extent of my church going. And then as I got a little older, friends would say, I'm an atheist and you should be one too. And, that friend was pretty cool, so I had to be an atheist too. So it kind of went on like that for a while. And then as I went into my teens, there was political, I was involved in some political kind of a left-wing people that were left-wing, and they were against any form of God. But then later on, I developed bipolar with psychosis. And in this psychosis, I saw things, I heard things, and they made so much sense that even after those things were gone, I believed that there had to be some kind of force, some intelligent, creative force that had put these things, because they were so real to me. And this wasn't the only thing that made me become more of a spiritual or religious person. But basically from that point, I started really wanting, after I recovered from my illness, I started really wanting to become more a part of the general society I was in, and be a good community member. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to go to church. Another thing I wanted to do was to go to 12-step programs and quit drinking and do all these things that were supposedly so wonderful. And they didn't solve all my problems. But as years went on and I learned that I did have an illness, it's a very difficult thing, as earlier panels have mentioned, to admit you have an illness and that you need help. And so I got on regular medication. I improved. And I simply started going to church. I went to one church for a number of years and had a falling out with them. And then I discovered that one of the things that really seemed to nourish my soul was to attend Catholic Mass. I'm not a Catholic, but I attend Catholic Mass. And it just seemed that it was a good way to connect with a community. It was a good way to learn about doing the right thing. Priests seemed always concerned about being honest, about being forthright and all these things. And as I grew in the community, knowing more people and everything, I started to really find that my neighborhood wasn't just streets and avenues and houses and buildings. It was a home. And, people would encourage me. People would accept that I had a mental illness, and life just got to be really good from that point. And that's where spirituality comes into my recovery.
So the way I look, my experience is this. It's like I needed spirituality in order to get recovery, right? So it's like, if I was to define it, it'd be like spirituality. It's like, I've had a profound alteration in my reaction to life, if that kind of makes sense to anybody, right? Out there in active addiction, it's like, every day the only thought that's really going through my head is, how can I get high, right? That's literally it, right? How can I get money for it? How can I do this? How could, basically, who can I screw over? Who can I steal from, rob from, bag, borrow, manipulate, right? Doing all these different things, and everything is about me, right? I'm blaming you for everything, even though I don't know you. I'm just going to blame you anyways, right? Because I want what I want right now, and I just don't care about the rest of the world and everything that's going on. And, if you were to ask me anything about God, my first reaction would be, like, you're crazy, right? Like, that's like blind faith. There's nothing there, like, to be honest, like, you're an idiot. That's the way I would look at you, right? Like, how could you believe in something like that, right? You're so weak. And then it's funny, I always have this equation. It's basically like pain plus desperation equal willingness, right? And that just happened to me one day. After a lot of, how do I say this? After like just a lot of experiences trying different ways and different things to try to get better, try to control my drinking and my using, I can't explain it, but it was just like one day, like a light went off and I met this individual who I already knew. He took me through the 12-step process, and that's the whole thing that it's about, right? It's about like spirituality. It's believing that there's just something out there that's like, I always say, like, I'm stepping down as CEO of Colin Enterprises and I'm gonna hire this power to be it, right? Because my life run on my own will can hardly be a success, right? My experience has proven it, right? I'd work at a job for 2 weeks. I got restless, irritable, and discontent, right? And I blame the boss for everything, the guy that I work with. So then I get another job, and I'm just spinning a wheel, right? And I'm in mud, and it's not going anywhere, right? And then I get connected to this power, whatever this power may be, right? And I'm told that I have to meditate every single day. I have to pray to this power, right? And then I got to go out and I got to help other people, right? And that's what my life is like today. And I'm not talking just in the rooms of like my 12-step fellowship, but when I'm at work with the guys that I'm working with, right? I'm trying to help them, and they're just like, wow, like, who is this guy? Like, was he actually trying to help me? Like, normal people, this is just my experience, right? It's like, we're so involved in ourselves and material things that are going on. When someone actually offers you help, it's kind of like, whoa, like, what's going on, right? That's just been my experience. But anyways, to end it, I'm just going to say this. The exact way I started it is that, I needed spirituality in my life to get recovery, right? Without it, man, my will sucks.
From the Islamic perspective, if I can add, I've had family member who had depression, postpartum depression, and so on, but mental health in Muslim community is still a big stigma, as in other societies as well. And religion and spirituality is not mutually exclusive in Islam. They're all part of the same. You cannot separate one another. Spirituality is built into it. So number one thing is to accept life as a gift from God, and see everyone as a human being. Some have different level of intelligence. So that when someone suffers from mental health, and there are different stages, as you know, from one smaller to the bigger one, people often attribute such illness as a punishment as from God. Why me? Why my family has this child? And accepting as a gift of God and giving them a hope to live, that's the primary basis for Islamic counseling, to accept that as someone God is testing you with this, caring for this particular child who has this illness, whether it's mental health or any other illness, autism also. So this is where one has to rely on one's faith. And the faith, it should reinforce the faith in God. Because if you do not take care of the children, you're really abdicating your responsibility as parents. And you will be liable you'll be answerable on the day of judgment, which Muslims believe there is life in the hereafter as part of the Abrahamic faith. So this thing people have to keep in mind. And God said in the Quran, in a long verse, it would take a little time to translate it, but it means that God has created you, and God describes the various process of creation from the blood clot from the sperm, that he has nurtured that in the mother's womb, and you come out as an infant. And then God give you the intelligence, but some may not have that. And God, at one time in your life, can return you to a stage where you know nothing, which is dementia, what we call today. And that is mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. So you have to understand that verse and say, hey, it can happen to us, and that is a growing problem, dementia, in Muslim community right now, where there's a lot of frustration about caring for people with dementia. So understanding the faith, the Quranic verses, and the prophetic tradition about taking care of anyone who has any types of illness, whether it's mental health or so, is very much meritorious in Islam. That you get credit, you merit for your life in this world and in the hereafter. Now, the stigma that prevails in many cultures can often lead them to believe that, no, it is some evil spirit possession. And they seek treatment. They do not seek treatment initially, and say it is, they're looking for some spiritual healing in the community. And people are exploited that way many times. So, and the other factor that is affecting the Canadian Muslim community is that many have come from, although we have a third or fourth generation now, but still they are attached to their cultural heritage, which in their own former countries, healthcare was not free, and people do not are afraid to access them. The second thing is that they always don't rely on the healthcare. It says homemade medicine or so on people use. So seeking proper treatment is very essential, and that is where the community needs to be guided. And now what I've seen in the last 30 years, since walking clinics have come up in numbers, and with due respect to any doctors here are running walking clinics, I find that many people who have come to me for counseling with mental health, I said, you need to see a psychologist, psychiatrist. And I said, who is your family doctor? He said, we don't have family doctors. And walking clinics don't refer them, they're just one-time patient. So they are, this matter I have taken up with the University of Toronto as well. I said, now for students coming from other cities in Ontario or other provinces, and now we have a lot of foreign students at U of T as well. So U of T's wellness office has now said they have psychiatrists and psychologists available to them. So this is a good beginning after we have raised concern. The chaplains, the Campus Chaplain Association at U of T has about 30 chaplains on the roster. So seeking treatment and getting them to be treated is a problem in the community among many cultures, and Muslim community is the same in that respect. Also rely heavily, which is encouraged from the Islamic perspective, is to practice the faith, prayers. And the Quran speaks that we can get cured, is a source of cure as well. That is your attachment to God, in one sense. You have hope that God can cure you. That's most people of the faith would believe. And that is where the spirituality comes in, that people need that kind of help. I remember how the government views the spiritual thing. The current like as I mentioned, and just to take a couple more minutes, that through former Ontario Multifaith Council, we were mandated by the Ontario government to provide spiritual care in government institutions. But they see that not as an essential service. In most corporate offices, diversity, human rights, and spiritual care things is seen as something nice to have, but not a must-have. So the budget cuts always fall on that. And our core funding was cut, so we could no longer provide that kind of service that we were able to provide that. So this is a problem in the province and in the country, that people are not seeing the need for a spiritual care that can help accelerate the recovery. I remember talking to a former health minister when he was appointed health minister just a couple of months after, former health minister George Smitherman. He asked me, what I'm up to. I said, well, we are trying to organize a conference on the need for spiritual care, what should be in the next 10 years. He says, oh, that's a dangerous thing. I said, what do you mean dangerous? I said, it can accelerate recovery. People have hope to live. We are giving them more a faster recovery, save you health care costs in hospital. Oh, here is my card, keep me posted. That is the kind of attitude that many government ministers have and policymakers about the need for spiritual care. And that is something to be addressed by us.
You know, a lot of times that wasn't mentioned in the other panels, but with mental illness, there's a lot of suicide. Every year in the United States, there's 40,000 people that take their own life, 40,000. And you can imagine that at the time, every person who wanted to take their own life wished that they were probably somebody else rather than who they were at that time. That 40,000, that's like where I come from, the town of Fort Erie, the outskirts of Ridgeway, Crystal Beach, Black Creek, Stevensville, a whole 14-mile radius of 40,000 people every single year, every 12 months. That's how suicide is such an impact. And I got to tell you that I grew up as an atheist. I was growing up as an atheist. And then, but I got a girl pregnant at one time, and I suppressed that. I didn't tell anybody about that. And I was just felt so guilty and everything like that. I kept it inside of me. And then that was the triggering of my psychosis, my schizophrenia. With schizophrenia, you have there's 3 legs to it: a genetic component, a biochemical component, and a triggering component. And mental illness runs in my family. We mentioned the different things. Cancer runs in families, diabetes runs in families, heart disease runs in families. All these things. And so why shouldn't mental illness runs in families? It does. It's just part of life. So anyways, 1 out of 10 people will try to commit suicide who have schizophrenia, and 50% or 50% will try to commit suicide, and 10% actually succeed, if you call that a success. And I was no different. I had a suicide attempt. I OD'd on my drugs a lot, and I was rushed to. I don't remember any of it. My father found me, called the ambulance. They took me to the hospital, pumped my stomach, the charcoal stuff, everything like that. But I want to make the point that you can never imagine how low or how dark or how despairing or how hopelessness you must feel to want to take your own life. And I, Bill MacPhee, consider myself, I took my own life. Where I am today is not what Bill MacPhee did, because I took my own life. It's what God has done in my life through Jesus Christ. And one of the things that I say is that we have what's known as Monday nights. We have a barn meeting. We call it barn, and we're just a bunch of men. I live in farming country, and so a bunch of men meet on a Monday night in the barn and kind of praise and sing and give testimony in that. But we created an acumen with barn, and we said that barn stands for broken and restored new. Broken and restored new. And that's what, no matter who we are in our lives, we will be broken people. We are all broken people. And it just depends. Some people are broken more than other people, and some people are called to different things than other people. And just for my journey, I've been called to be a follower of Christ, and that's where I get. So in my own mind, I let everything go. There's kind of a philosophy that says in the Christian faith is that when we are at our weakest, we are at our strongest. And that's because we know we're weak, but this fella here, Jesus, is right beside me holding my hand all the way through life. And that's how I look at spirituality, is that I'm not alone and that God wants the best for me. And if I let him work, he'll work in me, basically. That's my spirituality. So we'll go on to the next thing, talk with the panel.
Just you mentioned
Sure,
about
go ahead,
suicide.
Go ahead.
This is a problem in the community with, in general, I would say, not just in Muslim community, about the growing number of suicides, especially among younger people. And university campuses, this is maybe due to stress, lack of courage to stay competitive in the thing, but in workplace it's getting more competitive as well. So people nowadays are more stressed out. And Muslim community, suicide, in Islam, suicide is forbidden. It's anyone who commits suicide has a straight, easy path to hell. That's the hereafter life that I speak of. And if you kill somebody, say it is as if you have killed the whole humanity, that's the Quranic words. And if you save somebody, it is as if you have saved the whole humanity. So suicide and killing or aborting any fetus or so on, there are rules that unless the health is jeopardized, then the fetus can be aborted. Otherwise, suicide is not there, but we have new challenge of dealing with suicide, how to give people the hope to live. And that's the challenge for all counselors.
If I could just jump in on that, one of the things that, because I work for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, many of our clients, probably most of our clients, will experience suicidal ideation at some point of their illness. And what we try to do is encourage people to talk about those feelings. Because sometimes we shame people for having suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation. And what we've discovered is that that's not very helpful in somebody's recovery. We have to encourage people to talk about their feelings of suicidal ideation and that sort of thing. And it's a complicated discussion. Suicidal assessments are not an easy thing to do. I can tell you as a clinician that they're a complicated process, and oftentimes you're left scratching your head going, did I do a good assessment there, or did I miss something? And it's a complicated process, but in order to sort of get rid of stigma in mental illness, we have to get to a place where people feel free to talk about those feelings of suicidal ideation.
If I could say a couple words. Now, I don't by any means support suicide. I'm very much against it. When I was 17, I'll never forget working at this gas station, and this group of friends that I hadn't seen in a while drove up, and I went up and I'm like, hi, how you doing? You know, and they had these somber faces on them, and one by one they got out of the car, and they were just dead silent. And I'll never forget when they said, you know, Brad is dead. And Brad was a very good friend of ours. And I really think that when that happened, that was what triggered me to really go downhill with my mental illness. I had been experiencing depressions and all that, and so I'm very against suicide. But I have a certain belief, and it's probably not a very popular one, but I have a certain belief, and it came from a priest that I respect a great deal. Now, this is a priest that works in the inner city in a very low-income area. But he said that the way he feels is that if a person is very, very sick and they commit suicide, it's not them doing it. And so God wouldn't choose to send them to hell. And I don't mean to disrespect anything else anyone has said. And but it just on the topic of abortion, I just wanted to quickly say is that I don't believe in abortion, and it's not because I don't, not because of a firm religious foundation. Probably one of the main reasons I don't believe in abortion, as a person with spirituality in my life, is that when a woman goes ahead and has a baby and gives it up, they're actually in a better psychological state than if they had an abortion. And so I don't know. I just to add in my 2 cents. It's just that's the way I see it, and I'm hoping that gives a fresh perspective to some people. Thank you.
I just like drugs a lot. I don't really have experience with, just to be honest. I've OD'd and stuff, but I wasn't really trying to kill myself. I just wanted to get high.
You have to understand, one of the things with mental illness, one of the major things is I mentioned that people have cancer in their families, heart disease, diabetes, all these kind of things. But what really sets mental illness sets it apart, is that when people are mentally ill, their brain is mentally ill. And they don't understand that. So if I fell down today and broke my leg and my bone was sticking under my leg and there's blood, my brain would say, okay, you fell, you broke your bone, it's bleeding, you have to go to a hospital, get that treated. My brain can tell you that. The unfortunate part with mental illness is that our brain is sick. It doesn't know that it is ill. I went on a highway walking down in the coldest day of January, naked and everything like that. I was underneath of a light and everything like that. And you would say to yourself, you'd say, Bill, how do you absolutely know? How can you not know that you're mentally ill? How do you not know you're mentally ill? Here you are on a freeway walking for cars under a light. You're naked, coldest day of the year. How do you not know you're mentally ill? But you see, I'm going to give you a couple examples here. For example, and this might be a little bit crude, but how many have been in a room or a large crowd or sat beside somebody that had BO, body odor? How many have smelled somebody's body odor, right? And you say to yourself, how does that person not know that they don't stink? How do they possibly not know that they don't stink? But they do, right? They stink, but they don't know it. That's like how when the psychosis, how we don't know that we're mentally ill. Just like if you're treating somebody with a stroke, somebody who had a stroke, Mike Sarin will tell you, an internist, a physician, that if you tell them they have a stroke and they'll say, raise your right hand, and they go, and the doctor sees that they're not raising their hand, and the doctor says, well, raise your hand. They'll say, I just did. And the doctor says, what do you mean you just did? You didn't raise your hand. And go, oh, sure I did. Didn't you see that? That's like the phantom thing. That's a problem. They're in denial. That's because of the illness. So with mental illness, why it's different than physical illness is because the brain is sick and it's broken. It doesn't know it's ill. So just to get back on suicide a lot of times. So there's a lot of times where people's mind are very, very sick that bring them into a situation where they take their own life, but they may not have really wanted to commit suicide. It was just their sick mind that brought them into the situation that took their life. And that can be very, very, very comforting to people. So not all suicide is intentional. It comes from a sick mind. And we all know that with mental illness, some of us at one time, through our psychosis, have had very, very sick minds. Yeah, feel free. We'll open it up for questions because we only got 15 more minutes left, so we'll take some questions from the audience. Go ahead.
In the last 2 months, I attended the funerals of 2 people who completed suicide. One was 32 and another woman was younger. One came from the Jewish faith, one Coptic Christian. In both cases, the parents were terrified to come forward because the church wouldn't bury them in sacred ground. So they wanted to get their loved ones buried first by a priest or a rabbi. I believe in the Jewish religion, I think they bury them behind a fence if they have been known to take their own lives. And in Coptic Christian faith, I know they wouldn't be able to be in the family plot. So I think that's huge stigma in religion. Period. That's just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, it still happens. In some communities, won't allow people to be buried in sacred ground. However, I would argue that it's changing a lot with a lot of different religious communities. I can't speak for all of them, but I've seen both, like the Catholic Church, for example, put out statements that say that, when somebody dies from a mental illness, it's very much like what Bill was saying, that they don't understand what they're doing, that's part of the illness presentation. is not to have kind of clarity on that, and that's not even getting into the sort of medical assistance in dying conversation, because I know that that's very controversial. But recognizing that there's a lack of competency at that particular stage often will allow that religious organization to bury someone. And I would happily have a conversation with anybody who said that they shouldn't be allowed to be buried in that particular, because they died of suicide.
Yeah, burial is an obligation in Islam on all the communities. So no matter what the person has done, they deserve a religious burial. So that is up to the family, how big they want to publicize or big funeral they want to have or not. But there is no discrimination in putting them in a separate burial ground or anything like that.
Question from the audience?
I was just wondering, we're talking about physician-assisted dying and what your perspectives are with respect to physician-assisted dying with suffering and mental illness, and whether that's a topic that should be addressed, or sort of where things stand behind that way.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Everybody's just dying to speak, aren't you?
Yeah, that's a really tough conversation, because right now it's illegal for people with mental illness aren't going to be considered. My suspicion is that people are going to challenge that law, and my strong suspicion is that it's going to be overturned, and that people with mental illness won't be excluded in the future. And then we're going to have to really wrestle with what does it mean to have an irremediable illness? What does it mean to have capacity in certain situations? How do we assess that? How do we measure that? And right now, I just don't think that we have the tools. We've had 30 or 40 years to have that conversation about cancer. We can look under a microscope and X-ray and MRI, and we have really clear idea about where an illness is going with cancer or heart disease or Lou Gehrig's disease or any of these other things. But mental illness has a degree of subjectivity that is very difficult to negotiate and navigate sometimes. So it's going to be a longer discussion, and I just don't know what kind of answers we can provide at this point.
Yeah. I didn't quite get the question. What was the... Yeah.
It was around the impact of
Yeah.
physician-assisted dying.
Well, that is something that another hat that I have since last year is a Law Commission has projects going on this for recommendation to the government on end-of-life care and capacity to make decisions and guardianship. Two projects that Law Commission has. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm on the advisory committee from the faith perspective on this issue. And the federal government has already passed the law. But I have raised this question actually in an aging conference, that especially for police to determine whether the consent was forced or given willingly. And that question comes now under guardianship for mental health patients, that who has the power of attorney, and how the decision is going to be. They have to be evaluated whether such decision will be appropriate or not. So this is under consideration at the moment with the Law Commission, and some legislation may be coming forth next year in the province. But the end-of-life care legislation, although to me it is a balance, as a number of religious leaders have raised objection initially in the recommendations, and I also raised the objection with members of parliament on this. But when the legislation is a little bit balanced, but it is not pleasing to either side. Those who want to go on the pro side or against it. But from the purely religious point of view, saving life is the most important thing in, I think, all religions.
From my viewpoint, although I do have a regular faith that I try to go by, something that I always try to look at with issues such as right to die, issues such as legalization of drugs is, are we doing the right thing from a basis of compassion? Are we doing the right thing as human beings? And I guess in the specific case of physician-assisted dying, especially with regards to mental health, I would say it's not the right thing. And that's just my own opinion. And the reason I arrive at that is because I know I went through periods of my life when I felt horrible, when I felt my life was over. And, here I am talking in front of you wonderful people in the middle of downtown Toronto. And that's pretty good for a kid born on the prairies, And so I just, my opinion is I don't feel it's the right thing. I feel that, maybe if all hope is gone, if the person's health is failing, they're in pain, that, that could be the compassionate thing to do. But in cases of mental health, I would say no.
So I think the problem is we can all understand the issues, and we've all seen people who really, really suffered a lot, and we would say that, as they pass away and they say, well, that person's better, in a better place and everything. The key is, where we have to watch out, is that we don't want to start having euthanasia for financial reasons. If they start saying, 30, 40 years from now, well, if you're homeless and you have an income under $5,000 and you're a burden on society, we'll get rid of you. That's a slippery slope. I mean, we talk about our health care. Right now in Ontario, maybe a few years ago, it was like 43 cents of every dollar went into health care. Well, now that has brought up, I think it's like 47 cents for every dollar that comes in Ontario is up to 47 for every dollar we bring in on health care. So they say, well, if it gets up to 53 cents for every dollar that's spent on health care, that's pretty financially. What are we going to do? And then that's where it becomes a slippery slope when it's for financial reasons. And what I can understand is, and maybe Mike, it'd be interested on your point of view, but I always thought that doctors and physicians took a Hippocratic oath or whatever, the Hippocratic oath that says, do no harm. So I don't know how that whole industry is going to change, because actually in my thoughts, that if you are euthanasian somebody or the right to die, you are doing harm, in my thinking. So that's the two big issues from my point of view.
Good. Yeah, I'm just gonna. I'm not academic like everyone here. Not everyone. I'll just talk for myself though, right? I'm kind of like black and white guy. Grade 12 education. I have opinions about a lot of different things, and I'm just not going to share them here. But I'm going to try to tie this in just with spirituality for a sec. Hopefully this makes sense, because it really makes sense to me. But basically for 31 years of my life, I never voted, right? It's funny, I was just thinking this, I have a wallet, it's in my back right pocket, and but I've had this for 3 years now. That's huge, right? I have a bank card, I have, I know my social insurance number off the top of my head, and this is what I'm trying to get to, right? And this is because of where I've come from, right? I'm an addict first and foremost, right? Recovery's first, then family, then work or whatever, right? And I just want to say this, right? It's also giving me an identification card, right? And by getting that, I now get a vote. So this year I voted for the first time, and I voted Liberal, right? And it's just great that we can actually bring up these conversations to have them right now, right? Because to be honest, from what I've learned anyways in the last year about politics, if we were in small town Alberta right now and you said that, you'd probably be like, right? I don't know what they do out there, but, right? But anyways, so that's just what I'm trying to say, right? From my point of view, it's just basically, I voted Liberal, I got trust in them, they're going to do the right thing. As far as my spirituality it's I don't know, I'm not going to put out what my opinion is. I just trust in Trudeau and the Liberals.
question over here.
Hi. I wanted to kind of bring the discussion back to the issue around suicide and other mental illnesses as well, in the context of certain faiths having prohibitions around rites and practices after suicide, or stigma against behaviors associated with mental illness. And I think when we focus on the issue of the prohibitions around what we can and cannot do from a faith perspective, we're adding to the stigma around these issues. But every faith teaches about a forgiving God or a forgiving higher power. And I think that when we want to focus our discussion on removing stigma or alleviating the stigma around mental illness, addiction, and suicide, I think our discussion really needs to move to focusing on the fact that God is forgiving, and if he can, from certain faith perspectives, if he can bring you to a point where you are no longer yourself because of a mental health issue, he can also forgive you for the actions that you conduct when you are under those influences. And I think that that's a really big part of the discussion that gets forgotten about when we discuss this.
Okay, we have time for one more question, then we're going to break for lunch.
Yeah, I had a question. You encourage people to talk about suicidal thoughts. And the first time someone did that to me, it freaked me out. And I didn't know what to do. Like, do I call the police? Do I call mental health? Things like that. But then I kind of had to assess the situation that I didn't necessarily think it was imminent. And this person continues to talk about their feelings about suicide and why they would want to do it and stuff like that. What are some of the parameters where you can say, hey, this is imminent, this is serious? Or this person, like you said, you've encouraged them to talk about those feelings or those thoughts?
That's a really good question, and so we have what's called a suicide assessment form that we would go through, and we try to break up or assess a person as being at low, medium, or high risk. And from a clinician's point of view, I think it's fairly easy to see who is at high risk, because oftentimes those are the people who are saying, I've got a plan, I've got means, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it next Tuesday at 3 p.m. at such and such a place, and maybe they have some kind of a ritual or some other thing that they've planned it out. It's been a long thought process. Sometimes people who are in the medium range are thinking about suicide, but they still have some hope for the future. They're thinking, well, I'm going to school next semester, or I still have a job, I'm going to try and connect with my family. Those people, I think you can have good conversations with, but the people who are sort of at high risk have pretty much already made up their minds, and frankly, if they are at high risk, they're probably not going to tell you about it. Because they've already come to a decision, and they're at a place where they don't believe that anything that you say will dissuade them, because they've thought about every possible thing already. Those are the people that you often have to try to get to go to the emergency department or call the police or an ambulance or something like that. But the people I have most fears about, and the one that I struggle with, are in the medium range, because they could go high fairly quickly or they could be low. And as a clinician, there's a high level of subjectivity to this. Am I having a bad day as a clinician? Have I seen this client 7 times and they've talked about suicide for 7 times, and maybe I'm just feeling a little bit tired and I don't want to hear it, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I've heard this before. But so what we say is you have to take every conversation seriously, and you have to assess it as a new event. But I can just tell you, it's not easy.
And if I could just comment, sure, I'll give you the last word. Before you quit, give you the last word. I just want to mention one thing with suicide, and to your point there, is that a lot of time it's people who have lost a lot of potential, who have through their life have had a lot of potential, and they have hit rock bottom and don't know how to get that potential back, that they're the ones high at risk for suicide. And one of the things that's a practical thing that if you're a friend, a family member, that you could do with somebody who has suicidal thoughts and who is suicidal, is to create some kind of a contract, personal contract between you and them. We've heard about people who have had suicide pacts. Well, this is the opposite. You make that trust. You have to build that trust and work on a pact. And in my opinion, a contract, a non-suicidal contract, in my thinking, that works. I know that Scott's saying no, but go ahead, Dr.
Just like to go to the last comment that was made about forgiving God. In Islam, people with mental health, those who have capacity that they cannot memorize or do anything, they are fully exempt from all religious obligations. And if they commit suicide or at their death, anything, they're not responsible. So that is, they are exempted from all religious obligations. But suicide or anything, death should not be encouraged. That's the